You still haven't understood how much your need to be seen makes you vulnerable. As long as you look for answers in people's eyes, you remain manipulable. Real power begins the day you withdraw your attention. Not to protect yourself, but to dominate. Machiavelli taught it without ever using that word. Ignoring is a silent war, one that only strong minds can wage without trembling. If you are watching this video, it's because you sense that your energy is being misused. Wasted in invisible battles. I'm going to teach you how to withdraw. Not to run away, but to reign. Here, I'm not going to call you. I'm going to transform you. Write in the comments. I ignore, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Subscribe, like this video, and stay until the end. Because what you are about to discover will uproot an illusion inside you that you have been attached to for far too long. In the Renaissance, ignoring was not a weakness, but an art. A prince, Machiavelli said, should never confront everything head-on. He had to choose where to place his silence. And that silence, when used well, became more frightening than speech. In the courts of Europe, turning your gaze away from a man was enough to annihilate him socially. That subtle power, almost invisible, has been diluted in our modern societies, where everyone begs for attention. But contemporary psychology is rediscovering it. Ignoring activates a pain comparable to physical pain. It breaks emotional reference points and triggers a reorganization of the ego in the other person. That power is in your hands, but you unlearned it. Why? Who taught you that ignoring was cruel? Why do you panic the moment you withdraw your gaze? And above all, why are you so afraid that they will keep going? Is your need to be validated stronger than your instinct for power? You think you ignore out of fatigue, out of escape, or because of the situation. But in reality, you have never truly known how to ignore. What you were doing until now was running away while hoping to be noticed. Sovereign ignoring is an architecture of the mind. Cold. Calculated. Here are the invisible mechanisms you must master if you want to dominate without a word. The first invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is to refuse emotional war. When someone provokes you, seeks your gaze, throws jabs or insinuations, they don't simply want to hurt you. They want to make you react. They want to extract an emotion from you. They want you to exist through their maneuver. And the moment you react, even with anger, indignation, or justification, you lose. You accept their terrain. You enter their dynamic. You accept being defined from the outside. Refusing emotional war is not being passive. It is being unreachable. It is making it understood without saying a word that your inner kingdom is locked. That what the other does or says does not penetrate your mental sovereignty. Silence, in this case, is not distance. It is dominance. The one who receives no response from you begins to doubt, to exhaust themselves, to spin in circles inside their own strategy. They end up destroying themselves alone. This first mechanism is fundamental. Sovereign ignoring begins with refusing to be dragged into an emotional theater that is not yours. If you want to reign, you must learn not to defend yourself, not to correct what people think of you, not to save your image. Silence then becomes a clear message. I saw you. I understood you. But you do not deserve my energy. And that message, as invisible as it is a slap of a violence that only lucid strategists can measure. The most frequent mistake is to believe that ignoring is an escape. No. It is a sentence. A sovereign closure. The one who wants to destabilize you is waiting for you to play with them. Ignoring refuses the game. And without an opponent, the game collapses. The second invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is to erase the echo. A weak mind keeps other people's lines inside itself. It ruminates. It replays scenes. It waits for a future opportunity to respond or to get revenge. That habit poisons you. Because even if you remain silent on the outside, on the inside you are already capitulating. You cannot ignore someone if you still hear their voice in your mind. The echo is that psychic vibration a person leaves behind when you have not yet mastered your emotional architecture. They speak. You don't answer. But their sentence still comes back inside you, invades you, changes your mood, influences your thoughts. Sovereign ignoring is more than outward silence. It requires inner erasure. You must kill the echo. Do not rehash. Do not imagine yourself responding better. Do not feed the idea that one day you will make them pay. You must be able to deactivate the other person's importance. And for that, you must stop seeing yourself as a victim or as someone misunderstood. The moment you withdraw your attention, everything that comes from the other loses its substance. It exists only inside their own bubble. And you move forward. Every time you think about what they said, every time you reconstruct the scene, you restore an invisible link. And you lose your inner authority. Learn to erase. Stop replaying the scene. Sovereign ignoring begins in the mind. You refuse the echo. You refuse to let what belongs to the other survive inside you. You no longer live with their words. You remove them like you remove a discreet poison. And it is this mental disappearance that, in the long run, will hurt them the most. Because while they think they reached you, you are already living somewhere else. The third invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is not to justify yourself. The modern ego loves to explain, clarify, argue. It believes everything must be understood and that silence is an injustice. But every time you explain, you agree to be evaluated. Every time you justify yourself, you confess that the other person's opinion matters to you. And every time you want to be understood, you offer your vulnerability to anyone who wants to manipulate it. Sovereign ignoring does not seek to convince. It cuts. Then it walks away. It leaves no words behind. You do not need to explain why you are taking distance, why you no longer answer, why you ignore. The one who is concerned will feel the void. They will become the reason. And if they don't understand it, it's because they don't deserve it. Machiavelli knew it. Silence punishes better than speech. Because it leaves the other person in painful uncertainty. A strategic fog. It pushes them to question themselves, to doubt, to create the explanation by themselves. And in that inner chaos, they lose their power over you. To justify yourself is to give shape again to what you had dissolved. It is to revive the link. It is to prove, even indirectly, that you still want to be heard. True power is voluntary forgetting. It is the right to disappear from a toxic bond without explaining yourself. There will always be voices demanding that you explain. Let them scream into the void. That void is your strength. It is not a lack. It is a choice. And it is that choice to say nothing that, over time, leads to psychological domination. The fourth invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is not to send signals to the weak. Many think they are ignoring someone while multiplying weak gestures. They discreetly watch the stories. They like an old post by accident. They mention the other person indirectly in conversation. They take a route so they can coincidentally cross paths. All those gestures are micro-ropes that maintain an invisible bond. The other person doesn't hear you, but they perceive you. They feel your presence. They sense that you haven't cut it. And as long as you emit even the smallest signal, they know they still have a place in your mind. Sovereign ignoring requires radicality. It does not tolerate half measures. You cannot ignore on the surface and remain attached deep down. Be sharp. Don't look anymore. Don't think anymore. Don't even form their name in your mind. Because every microsignal is a breach in your inner empire. What you think is nothing, they feel as a call. They come back, not to repair, but to reconquer your attention. Weak signals are like psychic pheromones. Invisible, but powerful. The other captures them. They understand they can still move you. And that is where you lose everything. Ignoring is not disappearing. It is closing every possibility of return. It is making your position so clear, so absolute, that it cannot be misinterpreted. The other must hope for nothing. You must leave nothing. Sovereign ignoring is not an emotional pause. It is a closure without ambiguity. And in that absolute silence, you take your power back. The fifth invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is to ignore without hate. This is where many fail. They cut the link, but with rage. They stay silent, but boiling inside. They ignore in order to punish. That is not sovereign ignoring. That is silent revenge. And as long as you are driven by hatred, you remain tied. You have not transcended the bond. You have only flipped it. True ignoring is cold. It needs no emotion. It wishes neither repair nor suffering. It simply stops feeding. You withdraw your gaze, your energy, your breath. You withdraw your importance. And the other collapses, not because you hated them, but because they no longer count. That total detachment is an art. It demands inner transcendence. It requires that you want to prove nothing, correct nothing, hurt nothing. You don't need them to pay. You simply want them out of your inner kingdom. And you can only accomplish that by freeing yourself from the need to settle scores. The one who ignores without hate possesses an overwhelming power. Because they respond to no emotional call. They no longer react. They no longer vibrate for the other. They have moved elsewhere. And that non-violent disappearance is what is most unbearable for a mind that seeks to be seen. You don't punish. You abandon. Not with violence, but with elevation. And that absence, the other will never fill. The sixth invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is to understand that indifference is a reprogramming of your identity. You cannot ignore others if, inside you, you still seek to be accepted by them. Most people live in a theater where their role is defined by outside eyes. They are nice to be loved, useful to be validated, visible to feel reassured. And the moment you withdraw your presence, they fear being forgotten, replaced, erased. That is why ignoring others is violence against their illusion. You remind them that they do not define you. But that sovereignty is not improvised. It is forged. You must deprogram the idea that your image depends on others. You must tear yourself away from the belief that your identity is social. As long as you exist through the other person's gaze, you cannot detach from it. Your ignoring will always be false, always painful, always loaded with a secret hope. That is why this mechanism requires a radical reconstruction of your relationship with yourself. You ignore because you have recovered your inner density. You ignore because you no longer need to be seen in order to exist. You ignore because your world is full, not because it is empty. And from that moment on, each time you withdraw your attention, it is an act of affirmation, not a flight. Silence becomes the voice of your authority. You no longer reject. You rise. And the other no longer controls anything. Indifference becomes a silent declaration. I am whole even without you. It is pain for those who live off the gaze. It is deliverance for those who want to live free. This mechanism is one of the deepest. It turns ignoring into an identity foundation. You no longer ignore to obtain a reaction. You ignore because you no longer need one. And that is where your ascent begins. The seventh invisible mechanism of sovereign ignoring is to turn emptiness into a kingdom. For most people, ignoring means losing something. It means creating a void, a silence, a distance. And they cannot endure that void. They want to fill it quickly. Another conversation. A new bond. A new conflict. But those who understand the power of sovereign ignoring know that this void is, in reality, a sanctuary. You must not fill it. You must reign over it. Each time you withdraw your gaze, your energy, your involvement, you do not create an absence. You open a space. A space where you can finally hear your own thoughts. Revisit your own limits. Recover your psychic breath. That void is a crown. It frees you from emotional parasites, false dialogues, role-playing games. And if you learn to live there, to breathe there, to rebuild there, you become autonomous, unpredictable, untouchable. That is what the one you ignore fears. that you never return, that you enjoy your withdrawal, that you no longer need them, because their power depended on your reactivity. Your void suffocates them, and it is not a punishment. It is a reminder that your inner world exists even without them. This last mechanism is therefore the most strategic. It turns ignoring into a temple, into a fortress, into absolute authority. You no longer ask to be understood. You no longer demand voices. You sit on your throne in silence like a king who no longer needs to speak. And in that void, you build the most dangerous version of yourself. The one who no longer depends on anyone to exist. Where many think they master ignoring, their own illusion actually begins. Because true indifference does not flatter the ego. It breaks it. It reveals truths people prefer to avoid because it demands radical detachment. If you truly want to understand what your silence produces, you must face its forbidden truths. The first forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that your silence destroys the other person's illusions more than your anger does. When you stay silent, the other no longer knows where they stand. They have no landmarks, no echo, no feedback. Your silence forces them to face a void they never anticipated. They thought you would react. They expected justification, explanation, retaliation. But your indifference leaves them alone with their projections. They no longer understand. They invent. They question. And that mental fog becomes a prison because they no longer have control. Anger still gives a role. It designates a culprit. It maintains an emotional bond. It keeps the conflict alive. But silence dissolves everything. It does not say. It does not welcome. It does not save. It withdraws. It subtracts. And that subtraction is unbearable for those who believe they are necessary. Lucid indifference is not emotional coldness. It is a psychic decapitation. You don't shout. You don't explain. You don't hate. You simply remove the light. And the other, deprived of your gaze, melts into their own mirages. This truth disturbs because it proves that your silence is an active force, not an absence. It acts. It disarms. It breaks the mental structures of those who lived inside an illusion of superiority. It wasn't your scream they feared. It was your calm. It was your disappearance. It was that dry serenity that tells them, you no longer have any effect on me. And for many, that realization is a humiliation they will never forget. That is why lucid indifference is dangerous. It does not strike. It dissolves. And in that dissolution, it does more damage than any word. The next time you choose silence, remember this. It is not a retreat. It is a sentence. The second forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that you control nothing as long as you still want to prove. As long as you hope the other person understands your silence, you are not free yet. As long as you hope they suffer, regret, apologize, you are not sovereign. Your indifference remains loaded with desire, expectation, revenge. And that secret expectation makes you vulnerable. Because you still depend on a scenario. Even if you deny it, you want them to react. You want them to notice you. You want them to suffer. You want them to know what they lost. And as long as that poison is in you, your silence is only theater. Lucid indifference demands that you cut without hope, without return, without coded messages. It is raw, total, stripped of all expectation. It does not seek to hurt. It seeks to break. And that break is powerful only if it is clean. The human mind loves double games. It wants to ignore, but be regretted. It wants to stay silent, but be heard. It wants to flee, but be chased. Those are the invisible mechanisms that keep you captive, even inside your silence. Lucid indifference, on the contrary, is radical detachment. You ignore because you have nothing left to prove. You ignore because you have reclaimed your inner throne. Not to create an effect, but to free yourself from expectation. And in that purity, there is a power few understand. The power to be totally indifferent to what the other thinks of your silence. It is no longer a weapon. It is no longer a hidden scream. It is an act of sovereignty. You truly control only what you no longer expect. And that absence of expectation is the beginning of real inner domination. As long as you still want to prove, you are dependent. You wait for a response to your absence. But if your absence is total, there is no more dialogue. No more theater. No more game. There is only you. And at last, power begins. The third forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that silence reveals to the other what they refuse to see. There are truths only your absence can teach. Mirrors only your disappearance can hold up. As long as you are present, as long as you explain, justify, speak, you still protect the other from themselves. You soften the fall. You cushion the impact. But when you withdraw your voice, when you stop feeding the relationship, the person has no more escape routes. They are forced to confront themselves, their mistakes, their pride, their sabotage mechanisms. And that face-to-face is often unbearable, because your presence was a distraction, an escape, a distorting mirror. But your indifference is raw. It sends everyone back to their inner truth, to their lacks, to their violence, to their manipulations. Silence, in its lucid form, is not a passive absence. It is a revelation. It brings up what speech was hiding. It exposes what noise was masking. That is why it is so feared. It acts like a psychic scalpel. It cuts illusions. It forces introspection. It brings out the shadow. Faced with your silence, the other discovers themselves. They can no longer blame you. They can no longer accuse you. They are alone with what they are. And that solitude, for many, is hell. You do not want to punish them. You simply want to leave the game. But by leaving, you remove the screen behind which they were hiding. And what they see then is themselves. Lucid indifference is a merciless mirror. It says nothing, but it shows everything. And sometimes what it reveals is exactly what the other spent their whole life trying to flee. The fourth forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that it requires an inner peace few possess. Many stay silent but boil. They cut but hope. They step back but watch. They say they turned the page but secretly reread the lines. That is not lucid indifference. That is an unstable emotional pause. Lucid indifference does not settle for the outside. It roots itself in inner peace, a certainty, a density. You can truly ignore only if you no longer need to prove you are fine. If you no longer need to attract, justify, correct. That peace is not emotional numbness. It is a state where you no longer want to replay the scenario. You no longer want to revisit the scene. You no longer want to correct the story. You accept what was. And you move forward. That true detachment is not natural. It is worked on. Built in silence, in solitude, in lucidity. It is not contempt. It is healing. You ignore not because you are wounded, but because you are restored. And that restoration makes it possible to let go without regret. Lucid indifference is not coldness, but clarity. You see things as they are without trying to change them. And it is that acceptance that creates your peace. As long as you fight inside, your silence will be agitated. It will betray your tensions. It will still vibrate with need. But when you reach that peace, your indifference becomes absolute. It no longer provokes. It no longer punishes. It liberates. And it is that inner freedom, that absence of war, that makes you a force impossible to manipulate. The fifth forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that deep detachment says more than effort. It is a paradox few accept. The more you want to please, the more invisible you become. The more you force bonds, the more you weaken them. But the more you withdraw with calm and density, the more magnetic you become. The human mind is drawn to what it cannot possess. to what withdraws without explaining, to what lives without depending. And that form of sovereign detachment creates an invisible gravitational field. You call no one, but people look for you. You don't write, but people want to hear you. You offer no more, but people want to deserve you. That is how lucid indifference reverses power dynamics. You no longer seduce by strategy. You attract by coherence. Because you no longer need the other to exist, you become desirable. Not in the romantic or social sense. In the spiritual sense. You have become rare. And what cannot be grasped is what people want to approach. This mechanism is powerful, but it requires authentic detachment. If you ignore to manipulate, the other will feel it. They will sense the lack behind your silence. They will detect the calculation. And they will resist. But if your detachment is real, rooted, clean, it becomes irresistible. Because it seeks nothing. It lives. And everything that lives without seeking becomes fascinating to those who still depend on the gaze. That is why lucid indifference cannot be fabricated. It is earned. You become magnetic not by making yourself rare, but by being sufficient for yourself. And that silent, effortless radiance is the language of invisible sovereigns. The sixth forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that the more you ignore, the more the other reveals themselves. Many believe indifference cuts communication. In reality, it purifies it. It removes the mask. It reveals what was hidden under the surface. When you speak, the other plays a role. They adapt to what you want to hear. They manipulate your attention. They test. They measure. But the moment you fall silent, they no longer have a script. They are alone. And in that void, their real face appears. You see their insecurity. Their fragility. Their dependence. Their need for control. Your silence acts like an unfiltered mirror. It distorts nothing. It reflects brutally. That is why those who cannot stand indifference are often those who live in theater. Your silence removes their stage, their audience, their control. And they panic. They become aggressive, sugary, incoherent. They send contradictory messages. They want to provoke, seduce, guilt trip. But in truth, they collapse. Because your withdrawal is a test for their ego. They believed they had power over you. They believed they were necessary. They believed they could bend you. But your indifference forces them to face a reality they were fleeing. They control nothing. So lucid ignoring is not a cut. It is a revelation. You learn more about a person by watching how they react to your silence than by listening to them talk for an hour. And what you see will guide you. You will know whether this relationship was worth it. You will know who still deserves your energy. You will know what the other is willing to become without the mirror of your presence. And you will no longer be able to pretend. Indifference is not a barrier. It is a test. And rare are those who pass it. The seventh forbidden truth of lucid indifference is that it is the final act of your psychological awakening. To ignore without hate, to be silent without pain, to withdraw without need. That is the highest mental maturity. It is the state where you have nothing left to conquer, because you have already conquered yourself. Lucid indifference is not a power strategy. It is proof of healing. You no longer need to be heard, because you have already listened to yourself. You no longer need to be seen, because you look at yourself with lucidity. You no longer want to be loved to fill a void, because that void has become a sacred space. You do not ignore to crush others. You ignore because you no longer need them to shine. That detachment does not come from contempt. It comes from reconstruction, from endured solitude, from slow elevation, forged by pains you crossed, digested, transcended. And when you arrive there, you are no longer in revenge. You are in peace. A peace nothing agitates. A peace that depends on no message, no reaction, no gaze. And that peace scares people. Because it asks for nothing. It chooses. It filters. It withdraws without noise. It no longer argues. It lives. If you want to know whether you have reached that form of indifference, ask yourself one question. Am I at peace even if I am never asked for forgiveness? If your answer is yes, then you are free. If it is no, then your silence is still an expectation. And you must continue the inner work. Lucid indifference is a summit. And few hold it, because it requires rebuilding everything inside you. But those who hold it become unreachable, untouchable, free. So write in the comments, I reach the summit when I expect nothing anymore. Because that is where your ascent becomes real, and your solitude becomes a kingdom. Ignoring without structure is an escape. Ignoring with method is an ascent. Operational silence is not an absence. It is a tactic. Here are the concrete, repeatable, invisible gestures through which you turn your silence into strategy, your distance into power, and your withdrawal into domination. This is where your behavior becomes a weapon. The first operational silence tactic is to erase your digital trace. Your power declines every time you leave a visible footprint. In the modern world, attention is no longer limited to words. It is read in likes, views, comments, the time you watched. You say you want to ignore, but you still check the stories. You look at profiles. You wait for a reaction. Your silence is therefore betrayed. Because the other captures weak gestures, masked returns, furtive connections. That is why the first tactic requires total digital discipline. You must disappear. Do not look. Do not click. Do not check. You are no longer part of their visual field. You offer no more confirmation. And that cold, dry digital absence becomes a silent slap. The other begins to doubt. Did they see? Why don't they react? Why this void? You give no more answers. You withdraw the signals. You turn off the lights. And in that darkness, the other gets lost. That is where your silence becomes operational. When it is absolute, even in the invisible. This tactic is difficult because it requires self-control in the age of the instant. But it is indispensable if you want your ignoring to be total. Erasing your digital trace is not running away. It is withdrawing from the system. It is creating a wall. A real absence. A measurable distance. And above all, it is taking back control of what you were giving away for free. Your attention. The one who controls their digital presence controls the other person's psychological space. Because in a world where everyone wants to be seen, the one who fades becomes a mystery. And mystery is more powerful than visibility. From now on, every online movement must be thought of as a declaration of war or a strategy of silence. You are either there, or you no longer exist. And in that void, you reign. The second operational silence tactic is to practice mastered emotional indifference. Ignoring is not enough if you are still affected inside. True silence begins where emotions die down. You cross the person and you no longer vibrate. You hear their name and nothing moves. You receive a message and your heart doesn't shift. That inner coldness is a conquest. It is not improvised. It is built. Because at first, your silence will be agitated. You will pretend. You will smile on the outside, but tremble on the inside. You think you have turned the page while your mind is still waiting for a sign. You must diffuse that reactivity. The tool is simple. Progressive detachment. With every mental contact, every memory, every stimulus linked to that person, you consciously choose not to react anymore. You do not ruminate. You do not restart the scene. You do not fold your heart around poisoned memories. You observe. Then you let it pass. Emotional indifference is not a blockage. It is a cold fluidity. A capacity to no longer be shaped by the other. You do not need to hate them or love them. They exist. You exist. But they no longer have a grip on your inner world. And they will feel it. The absence of emotional echo is more violent than rejection, because it means your world continued without them. They no longer matter, and that devours them. This tactic is an invisible sword. It cuts attachments. It severs invisible ties. It ends psychic games. You are there in presence, but inaccessible. And that mental inaccessibility is the foundation of sovereign indifference. You no longer respond inside. You observe. You ignore. And you move forward. Without noise. Without effort. But with a silent authority the other feels, even if they do not understand it. The third operational silence tactic is to master neutral speech. Sometimes you cannot withdraw completely. Family. Work. Social obligations. Some ties still require interaction. But even then, you can impose your silence. Not by being totally mute, but by speaking without giving yourself. This is where neutral speech is born. You answer, but without warmth. You listen, but without opening. You participate, but without handing yourself over. That neutrality is not impoliteness. It is strategy. Because it makes the other understand they no longer have access to your intimacy. You give nothing more to read. Your gaze is calm, but distant. Your words are clear, but without emotion. You no longer react. You no longer try to convince. You no longer try to be liked. You communicate by necessity. But your inner world is closed. And that disturbs. The other senses they no longer have a hold. That their words no longer reach you. That their presence no longer carries weight. They begin to doubt. To panic. Because all they receive is a neutral version of you. A facade. A mask. And inside that mask, they feel powerless. Neutral speech is a form of active indifference. It protects you without conflict. It imposes distance without rupture. It elevates you without noise. And above all, it sends a subtle but powerful message. You no longer have access to my inner fire. This is not punishment. It is regulation. You control access to your inner fire. And that mastery makes you an entity no longer invadable. This tactic is essential in the gray zones of your life. It allows you to remain standing, polite, functional, while maintaining sovereignty. You are there, but absent. Visible, but untouchable. Present, but inaccessible. The fourth operational silence tactic is to practice strategic retreat. In a world that pushes constant exposure, withdrawing is a revolutionary act. Retreat is not weakness. It is a maneuver. It is extracting yourself from environments that feed noise, gaze, and the need for validation. You leave the spaces where your energy is diluted. You withdraw without explanation, without drama, without stage. You make no speech. You step away. And if this movement is well executed, it creates a silent wave. Those who watched you notice your absence. Those who tested you feel the void. Those who depended on your presence to shine begin to wobble. Strategic retreat is not a definitive disappearance. It is a reorganization. You cut the flow. You reset. You recover your energy. And in that silence, you observe. You see who comes. Who insists? Who respects? Who betrays? Silence becomes a filter. It reveals intentions. It sorts. It eliminates. But above all, it returns you to yourself. You no longer react to outside games. You regain control of your rhythm, your space, your speech. This retreat is not escape. It is reconquest. You become the architect of your inner world again. You decide who enters it, what lives there. And in that restored territory, you regain lucidity. This tactic is vital for those who have dispersed too much, given too much, exposed too much. It allows you to become rare again. And what is rare is respected. On one condition: that you do not come back to beg for attention, but that you come back with a full presence. Autonomous. Closed to parasites. The fifth operational silence tactic is to ritualize forgetting. You think forgetting will come naturally. That with time, you won't think about it anymore. But forgetting is not given. It is decided. It is organized. It is provoked. Every day, you must tear out of your mind the invisible roots of the other. A word. A memory. A scenario. Everything that still ties you must be seen, then dissolved. For that, you must create a ritual. A precise moment when you cut. When you withdraw mental permission. It can be in the morning, when you choose not to relive the scene. Or in the evening, when you write a freeing sentence in a notebook. The form doesn't matter. What matters is regularity. Forgetting is a discipline, not a grace. You must want to forget the way you choose to breathe. With force. With intention. Every time you let memory return, you revive a connection. You give life again to something that should be dead. Forgetting, in operational silence, is a symbolic execution. You do not destroy the other. You withdraw their right to live in your inner world. And you repeat that act until their voice goes out. Until their image becomes neutral. Until your heart no longer reacts. That ritual is a reconquest. A mental disinfection. You clean your mind. You make space. And in that recovered clarity, you become free again. Forgetting is not a passive erasure. It is a will. And those who practice it every day become, little by little, invincible. The sixth operational silence tactic is to master the power of never reaching back. Ignoring is not only not responding, it is also never reinitiating. In invisible power dynamics, the one who reinitiates loses ground. The one who sends "I'm here, did you see my message?" or "I was thinking of you," abdicates position. Even under the cover of kindness or innocence, reaching back is masked submission. It says, "You are missing from me. You still have power over me." Lucid indifference imposes a golden rule. If the other ignores you, you never reach back. Not once. Not a word. Not an attempt. Because every reach back is a crack in your sovereignty. You give the other the central role again. You put yourself back into waiting. You destroy your silence. Never reaching back is difficult because it bruises the ego. It forces you to stare the void in the face, to accept the absence of response. But it is also the most powerful act you can do. It affirms that you do not need to close the story, that there will be no sequel, that there will be no follow-up. It says, "What you do not feed, I let die." And that posture freezes, because the other understands you do not need reopening, that you will not come back, that you live elsewhere. The one who never reaches back becomes an enigma. They place themselves outside the emotional circuit. They do not beg. They do not ask. They do not justify themselves. And that absence of movement creates brutal authority. Silence becomes a fracture line. A border. You were there. You withdrew. And you will not return. It's over. Not out of anger, but out of mastery. And that absence of reachback is the final act that closes the door with greatness. Without noise. Without drama. But with implacable clarity. The seventh operational silence tactic is to rebuild your world with no place left for the old. You can ignore. You can be silent. You can step away. But if your world remains empty, the old will return. Because the mind hates a vacuum. If you do not create new connections, new projects, new obsessions, new scenes, the old will take its place again. It is not because you ignore that the other disappears. It is because you build something else in its place. And that rebuilding must be total. Not a diversion. Not an emotional bandage. A true reorganization of your inner space. New landmarks. New routines. New circles. You leave no empty space. You fill your life consciously. Because it is by building that you heal. And it is by healing that your silence becomes credible. Otherwise, it will only be a retreat. A disguised expectation. A pause. But lucid indifference is not a pause. It is an inner goodbye. It says, I no longer look back, because what I build ahead of me is greater. And that sentence must be true. It must be felt in your actions, your rhythm, your posture. The other must feel you didn't just disappear. You evolved. You are elsewhere. Higher. Denser. More inaccessible. And that is what breaks them. Your absence becomes an ascent. You don't run away. You change altitude. And the other, left on the ground, can only see that you are no longer reachable. This last gesture is fundamental. It closes the silence with a rebirth. And that rebirth, if real, makes any return impossible. You did not only turn the page. You changed the book. And in that new chapter, they no longer have a role, a place, or power. Now you know what you were never taught. Ignoring is not running away. It is reigning. It is not a lack of courage. It is an excess of lucidity. The one who knows how to withdraw without noise, without shouting, without a scene becomes dangerous. Because they no longer need the stage. They no longer wait for validation. They no longer beg for explanations. They live outside the game. And that is what makes them feared. Lucid indifference is not a temporary strategy. It is a new breath. A new state of consciousness. You withdraw your voice not to punish, but to find your axis again. And in that silence, you become an empire. Those who do not understand your withdrawal will call it coldness, pride, cruelty. Let them talk. Because while they comment on your silence, you are building an inner peace they will never know. That power is inside you. You need nothing else but your discipline, your lucidity, your authority over yourself. So let no one tear you away from yourself again. Give no more energy to what does not nourish you. Choose. Close. Move forward. And above all, remember this. It is in your silence that you are listened to the most. It is in your absence that you take up the most space. If this message awakens something in you, subscribe, share it, and let it be known that from now on, your gaze will no longer be given lightly.
Nous vous remercions d'avoir regardé. Nous espérons que cette vidéo vous a apporté un éclairage précieux. N'oubliez pas de vous abonner à notre chaîne et d'activer la fonction de notification pour rester au courant de nos vidéos informatives.